In the quiet, picturesque town of Evergreen Valley, the shocking murder of Sophie Thompson sent shockwaves through the community. What looked like a peaceful, close-knit suburban neighborhood was torn apart by a crime of passion and betrayal that exposed the dark side of seemingly perfect lives. The lives of two couples, Jack and Emily Harris and Tom and Sophie Thompson, became tangled in ways that would lead to obsession, deceit, and ultimately murder. But first, we have to go back to the beginning. Jack Harris was a respected engineer, known for his easygoing charm and what appeared to be a solid marriage to Emily, a devoted nurse. Tom Thompson, a successful real estate agent, and his wife Sophie were the Harrises' closest friends. The two couples didn't just share neighborhood barbecues and weekend getaways. They also engaged in a consensual partner-swapping arrangement that, at first, added some spice to their lives. But underneath this unconventional lifestyle, dangerous emotions were brewing. Jack's fascination with Sophie turned into an all-consuming obsession, one that Emily, his wife, couldn't ignore. Sophie, sensing how intense Jack's feelings were becoming, decided to end the arrangement, not realizing the deadly consequences this would trigger. Jack and Emily had been married for almost a decade, and from the outside, their marriage seemed rock solid. Jack was doing well in his career, and Emily was loved by her patients and colleagues. They lived in a cozy house on Oak Lane, complete with a well-kept garden that Emily took pride in. Tom and Sophie had moved to Evergreen Valley about 5 years ago, and they quickly hit it off with the Harrises. Tom, always outgoing and friendly, was the life of every party, while Sophie, with her striking looks and vibrant personality, was just as popular. Their friendship with the Harrises grew strong, built on shared interests and mutual trust. The idea of partner swapping first came up one night over dinner at the Harrises' place. Fueled by a few too many glasses of wine and a sense of adventure, the conversation drifted to open relationships. Surprisingly, the idea wasn't met with shock, but curiosity. Over the next few weeks, the couples discussed it more seriously, setting boundaries and rules to make sure their primary relationships stayed intact. The first time they swapped partners, it was awkward but exciting. Jack and Sophie, Tom, and Emily, each couple spent the night with the other's spouse. It was nerve-wracking but left them wanting more. What started as a once-in-a-while experiment soon became a regular thing, bringing new energy to both marriages. At first, it seemed to work. Both couples seemed happier, closer even. They kept up their social lives, hosting parties together and going on trips. Their secret was tightly guarded, only talked about within the safety of their homes or during private get-togethers. The thrill of it all gave them a rush, and for a while, it felt like they'd found the perfect balance. But as time passed, small changes started to show, especially in Jack. He was paying a lot more attention to Sophie, finding excuses to be alone with her. Emily noticed, but she tried to brush it off, hoping it was just a phase. Tom didn't seem to catch on to the growing tension. What they didn't realize was that Jack's interest in Sophie was turning into something far more dangerous. He couldn't stop thinking about her, replaying their nights together over and over in his mind, craving more time with her. What started as a harmless bit of fun was turning into an obsession that would have devastating consequences for everyone involved. Jack's feelings for Sophie were no longer just a thrill. They'd become an obsession. He thought about her constantly, even during work meetings and family dinners. His job, which he once loved, now felt like a distraction from what he really wanted: Sophie. He started finding more and more reasons to be around her, offering to help out with things Tom usually handled, or inviting the Thompsons over more often. Emily began to pick up on his fixation. At first, she chalked it up to the excitement of their new arrangement, but soon it was clear that Jack's interest in Sophie went way beyond what they'd agreed to. He became moody and distant when they weren't with the Thompsons, and he often brought up Sophie in conversation, talking about her likes and dislikes, her habits and quirks. One evening, after a dinner party, Emily finally confronted Jack. His response was defensive. He dismissed her concerns as jealousy. Not wanting to rock the boat, Emily let it go, but kept a closer eye on him. Her suspicions only grew when she caught him staring at Sophie during get-togethers, his gaze lingering a bit too long. Sophie started to notice Jack's growing obsession too. At first, she was flattered by the attention, but it soon became uncomfortable. His touches felt more possessive, his words more intimate than they should have been. She talked to Tom about it, but he shrugged it off, thinking Jack was just being more affectionate. Tom's lack of concern left Sophie feeling more and more uneasy. Things came to a head during a weekend trip to a cabin by the lake. The couples had planned the getaway to relax and spend some time away from the usual routine. But the trip only made Jack's obsession more obvious. He spent almost all his time with Sophie, insisting on taking her out on the lake alone, leaving Tom and Emily behind. The tension was thick, and Sophie's attempts to distance herself were met with subtle but persistent resistance from Jack. One night, while sitting by the fire, Jack made a comment that crossed a line. He talked about running away, starting a new life together, just the two of them. Sophie, shocked and uncomfortable, excused herself and went to bed early. Emily, who had overheard the conversation, confronted Jack again. This time, he didn't dismiss her so easily, but still refused to admit the depth of his feelings. Emily was frustrated and scared. She loved her husband, but she could see that his obsession with Sophie was spiraling out of control and could destroy everything they had. Despite her efforts to intervene, Jack's behavior only got worse. He started showing up where Sophie was, her yoga classes, even her workplace, pretending it was all just coincidence. Sophie's discomfort turned to fear. She confided in a close friend who advised her to cut off all ties with Jack. Determined to take control, Sophie decided to end the arrangement for good. She hoped that, by doing so, Jack would come to his senses, and they could all move on without causing more damage. One evening, while Tom was away on a business trip, Jack showed up at Sophie's house unannounced. She was caught off guard, but let him in, hoping to avoid a scene. They sat in the living room, tension hanging in the air. Jack confessed his feelings for her, talking about a future where they could be together. Sophie, horrified, tried to reason with him, reminding him that their arrangement was never supposed to be more than just fun. As Jack's pleas grew more intense, Sophie's fear turned to anger. She firmly told him that it was over and that he needed to respect her boundaries and her marriage. Jack, visibly shaken, tried to convince her to reconsider, but Sophie stood her ground. Over the next few days, she avoided Jack, hoping he would come to terms with the end of their fling. She confided in Emily, who listened with a heavy heart. Emily knew her husband's obsession had gone too far, but she was torn between supporting Sophie and staying loyal to Jack. She promised Sophie she would talk to him, hoping to calm things down, but Jack's obsession only deepened. He started stalking Sophie, showing up at her work, waiting for her after hours, and leaving messages professing his undying love. Sophie, feeling more and more unsafe, decided to confront him one last time. They met in a secluded park, away from prying eyes. Sophie told him again that it was over, and his behavior was unacceptable. She begged him to let go and move on. What Sophie didn't know was that Emily had followed Jack to the park. She watched from a distance, heart pounding as the confrontation unfolded. She could see the desperation on Jack's face and the determination on Sophie's. Emily knew this was inevitable, but she also feared what might happen next. As the argument escalated, Jack's desperation turned to anger. Sophie's refusal to entertain his fantasy felt like a betrayal. He lashed out, verbally attacking her, accusing her of leading him on. Sophie, holding back tears, refused to back down. Emily, watching from the shadows, felt a surge of panic. She knew she had to step in before things got out of hand. She came out of hiding and called out to Jack, her voice trembling. The sight of Emily seemed to snap Jack out of his rage, and he turned to her, confused and relieved. Sophie took the opportunity to walk away, determined to put as much distance between herself and Jack as possible. Emily, now alone with Jack, tried to calm him down, telling him they would find a way through this, but deep down, she knew their lives had changed forever. The encounter at the park left Jack in turmoil. Sophie's rejection and Emily's unexpected appearance had shaken him deeply. He went home that night, his mind a storm of anger, betrayal, and despair. Emily, sensing his inner turmoil, tried to comfort him, but Jack was inconsolable. In the days that followed, Jack's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was either angry or deeply depressed, spending his days obsessing over Sophie's rejection. Emily, unable to reach him, felt her own frustration and fear growing. She knew something was about to break, but she couldn't predict how. One fateful night, everything came to a head. Jack, in a moment of blind rage, drove to Sophie's house. He had been drinking, his mind clouded with thoughts of Sophie's refusal and the idea that she had betrayed him. He confronted her on the front porch, shouting accusations, his words slurred and full of venom. Sophie, terrified, tried to calm him down. But Jack was beyond reasoning. The argument escalated, and in a fit of uncontrollable anger, Jack attacked her. What happened next was a blur. Jack, realizing what he had done, panicked and fled the scene. Sophie's lifeless body lay on the porch as the reality of his actions began to sink in. He drove aimlessly for hours, his mind a haze of fear and guilt. When he finally returned home, Emily was waiting for him, her face pale with worry. Jack confessed everything, his voice shaking. Emily, horrified and heartbroken, knew their lives were over. The police arrived the next morning, responding to a neighbor's call about a disturbance. Jack was arrested, and the news of Sophie's murder spread through Evergreen Valley like wildfire. The community, once so close-knit, was shattered by the tragedy. The truth about the couple's arrangement came to light, and the idyllic facade of their lives crumbled. Jack was charged with Sophie's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Emily, unable to cope with the weight of her husband's crime and her role in the events that led to it, eventually left Evergreen Valley, hoping to find some peace away from the memories that haunted her. Tom, devastated by the loss of his wife, struggled to rebuild his life. The pain of betrayal and the grief of losing Sophie would stay with him forever. Evergreen Valley would never be the same.